welcome from the KIX EMAP Hub. I'm speaking also on behalf of José Luis Canellas. Some of you might know him and the whole leadership team. And it's a really wonderful occasion to see you all. You know that you were handpicked, I hope, because it was different than other events that we do. This webinar, it was by application because there was such a large group. And so you should feel very good about yourself that you were handpicked and that you participate in two of the sessions dealing with implementation research. At KIX EMAP, we always try to look at current trends. What are the issues that the experts and governments talk about? And implementation research is on the top of the list. So we were very happy to have experts speaking on the topic. Let me just say 1 minute about KIX EMAP. KIX stands for Knowledge and Innovation Exchange. It is an initiative that is funded by Global Partnership for Education. And the global implementation agency is IDRC, which is International Development Research Center. They are based in Ottawa. And we, as KIX EMAP, are one of the 4 hubs that facilitate collaboration among researchers, policymakers, experts. We strongly believe that evidence is important for policy and planning and practice. At the same time, we believe that this evidence and this expertise needs to be produced by local experts. Otherwise, it will go nowhere. It will not be used. It will not be picked up. So this is our philosophy. This is our mission in KIX EMAP. And EMAP, if in case you're interested, stands for Europe, Middle East, and North Africa, Asia, and Pacific. Currently, we have 38 GPE countries that are part of our hub, and we have 4 sub-regions with a lot of activities. Just to wrap up, so this is a skill strengthening workshop, but we also have learning cycles. We have thematic webinars, we have uptake forums, all at the regional, sub-regional, and national level. So just to put in perspective, this one is specifically on skill strengthening. Without further ado, let me pass the floor to Maria Brindlemeyer, who is key to the BE2 group, Building Evidence in Education. It is a group that is very influential among donors, and you will get all the inside secrets of donors and their language and what they think, how things should be. So we're very happy to have Maria and her group. Maria, please. I believe Maria needs to be unmuted. Okay.
Yes, I did that myself. I muted myself. Apologies. So, thank you, Gitte, for the nice introduction. Very excited to be working with KIX on this webinar. I'm leading the Secretariat for Building Evidence in Education, or B Square, or B2, which is a working group of over 40 organizations that are funders of education research and focused on evidence generation. And the main activities are collaboration, to foster collaboration among the funders of education research, but also to kind of encourage standards that are related to education research. And with that in mind, we have created several guidance notes, of which the implementation research is one of them. You can find the other ones on our new website on buildingevidenceineducation.org. And today we will focus on the implementation research guidance note. And with me is Christy Allison, who will actually do most of the presentation. She's a consultant who helped us generate that guidance note and will also be the presenter for most of the day today. As I see you're all introducing yourselves in the chat, thank you. And can we go to the next slide? So just a quick announcement about what we're going to do today. So it's a 2-day training. Today is the first half. We'll have a little homework for you. It won't be hard. And then we hope to see everybody back tomorrow. So today we'll have a definition of what is implementation research. Why might you want to use implementation research? How does that align with your national, regional, or local priorities? We'll look at a case study, and we'll talk about how to advocate for implementation research. It is a newer type of research, as Gita said earlier, and so sometimes people are not either aware or not as comfortable with it. So that will be part also of your homework. And with that, let me hand it over to Christy.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you all for being here today. So let's dive right in. As some of us I know are still filtering in, but we will move along, and we'll have multiple opportunities to ask questions as we go today. So we're going to start today's discussion with how we will define implementation research. Scholars have developed numerous definitions of implementation research, but the one we will use is as follows. Implementation research is the scientific inquiry into questions concerning implementation, the act of carrying an intention into effect, which in education research could be policies, programs, or individual practices, which we collectively call interventions. To put it more simply, it is a rigorous examination of what works, for whom, under what contextual circumstances, and whether interventions are scalable in equitable ways. The basic intent behind implementation research is not only to understand what is and is not working, but to understand how and why implementation is going well or poorly, and testing approaches to improve it. It is also important to note that implementation research is generally intended to be responsive and iterative. As you learn how to improve the intervention, you do so and adjust your inquiry or even start to ask a new research question to ensure that you really understand what is working and why it is working. Next slide, please. Implementation research focuses on questions around 3 specific areas: the intervention delivery itself, the context in which it is delivered, and the stakeholders involved in the intervention. Areas of implementation research might include feasibility and appropriateness to context. Addressing these questions ensures sensitivity to context and responsive implementation of the intervention. Acceptability and adoption to stakeholders or by stakeholders. And by adoption, we're looking at uptake or their intention to try to implement it accurately or with fidelity. This is important because you can examine stakeholders' ability to absorb the intervention in the context of their motivations, their incentives, their capacities, and their constraints. When we look at intervention delivery, we might consider fidelity, implementation cost, and equity. These elements are critical to provide information for adaptation of intervention strategies and characteristics. Finally, implementation research may focus on sustainability, the institutionalization and full integration of the intervention across all 3 aspects, which drives local ownership. Next slide, please. Before we dive in and get into further, does anyone have questions on the definition or what we're using as our general conceptual framework for implementation research? And if you have questions, those can go in the chat.
So perhaps we can jump into one of our polls, Christy.
Let's do that.
I think we just received one question or two questions in
Perfect.
the meantime.
Uh-huh.
Or free now.
All right.
Okay. So let me start with the last question first. The intention of the research, yes, could be to change, but it's to make sure that you're changing in ways that improve results for the beneficiaries or for the participants of the intervention. Does it deal with the politics of implementation? Absolutely. We're going to spend some time today and tomorrow talking about stakeholders in politics and how that works out. So it does absolutely deal with politics in a couple of different ways. And we'll talk about that. Which of the framework comes first in the research process? It depends on what you need to know. Generally, all three things are important. And I would say it depends on what type of intervention you're using. So, for example, if you're looking at a pilot activity, you might be interested in stakeholder perceptions or fidelity of implementation as your priority. If you're looking at scaling, context might become a more important set of questions for you as you look at rolling something out across a wider variety of contexts. So the framework is flexible and you can look at any of those elements or all of those elements. And we'll talk about how to think about sequencing and structuring questions a little bit later in the session. And I believe there was one more question.
Two more.
Similar or different from action research and differences between implementation study and a regular study? Well, we're going to get to that, and same with timing. So we'll get to the timing questions too. So I'm going to table those for now, and let's move on to our poll. And for the moment, we'll focus on whether some of these things, based on the definition we provided, would be implementation research or not. So Maria, do you want to launch
Can
the
we
poll
pull
for
up
us?
the first polls?
Maria, should we post the first poll?
Yes, please.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yes. Great. So the first question is kind of a test also to see how to use the poll. And we wanted to find out what you want to gain from this training so that we get a better idea of what your interests are. Great, I see lots of responses already. Excellent. I see lots of responses across the board. So nothing in particular that stands out yet. We will share the results in just a second. I'm just waiting another few seconds for everyone who hasn't yet responded. Okay, I think we will, still coming in. Okay, I think we will share the results. So we see that a lot of people want to understand when you should select implementation research, understand how to convince stakeholders to use implementation research, learn about the process, understand when in the project cycle to use it, when to use it in scaling, and how to ensure that it's trusted. So pretty much all the things are of interest, so that's great. We hope to be able to touch on all of that. Let's start the next poll, please.
Sure, just one moment.
Mm-hmm. And I see there's still also some questions coming in the chat. So, all right. So now we're going to test if you were listening to Christy with what she presented so far. So this is a question of, is this implementation research? And you have a choice of yes, maybe, or no. So the statement is: a regional office of education conducts research in partnership with the teacher training college, the union, the school management, to understand how well the rollout of a new teaching materials goes and how effective they are for teachers in the classroom. Is this implementation research? I'll give it another few seconds. I think I can see a very, very clear majority here for one of the answers, and we'll share it in just a second. All right, I think we'll share the results. So a very strong yes. Christy, perhaps a few comments?
Sure. So typically, yes, we would consider this to be implementation research because it's focusing on the intervention delivery, the rollout of the teaching materials, and the stakeholder perceptions, how effective they are for teachers. And presumably, we don't go into detail in this poll, but presumably they're using that information to improve the process, right? So yes, in that way, we would consider this to be, yes, implementation research. So let's go to the next one.
Christy, while we're waiting for the next poll, there's also a question in the chat about implementation versus action research. What is the difference? Do you want to answer that later, or?
Sure, we can, while that's coming up, there are a number of similarities.
Are we
Sorry.
getting the next poll, please, from our poll team? Okay,
There are a
good.
number of similarities between implementation research and action research. How you structure it is often a key difference in who's engaged and how. So we will talk about some of those differences.
Great.
So back to our next poll.
Yes, so now we have a Minister of Education conducts a pilot test of a new mother tongue curriculum in 20 schools for 3 years and compares student performance data in the pilot schools to the remaining schools. Is this implementation research? So there's more divergence or the differences in the answers I can see. I think we can share the poll results. So a lot of people saying no, kind of the majority, less than half saying yes, and a lot more maybes. Christy, over to you.
At this stage, I think we would consider this to be probably too early to be implementation research. We would probably consider this to be efficacy research. It's a new curriculum, and it's not clear whether the curriculum performs well compared to the original or the other curriculum that is in use. And so at this stage, they're not really testing the implementation, and they're not looking at context or the stakeholders or the delivery necessarily itself. They could look at the delivery in this, but if all they're doing is comparing the student performance data, then that is not getting to implementation research. So
All right.
let's look at our third question, our next question.
So the fourth poll for this round, the last poll, is civil society organization that provide education services to out-of-school youth partners with the university and the local chamber of commerce to research why 40% of the youth who complete their program do not succeed in finding employment. Is this implementation research? So we have a very split set of responses here. Still coming in. All right. We can share. So really very much split between yes and no, and still a few maybes. And I think, we're giving you only like 2 sentences, so obviously we are not giving you the whole background. And it's sometimes harder to make that decision of yes or no, but Christy.
In this case, I would land as a solid maybe. So it could be implementation research if the research question is looking inward at the intervention delivery or its context or how the stakeholders perceive the intervention. However, if the research is focusing externally, for example, on the requirements of employers or the alignment between the requirements and intervention outcomes, we would not necessarily consider that implementation research. So it's not always immediately clear, right? It's important to get to the question and to understand more about the context. So we can stop sharing our poll and let's move on to our next slide. And this is going to help us. We're going to spend the next few minutes sort of distinguishing implementation research from some of the other forms of research to address some of those questions that have been popping up in the chat.
Next slide.
There we go.
Next slide. Next slide.
There we go. Okay, so let's focus for a moment on the key principles of implementation research. First, it's intentional and it's planned as part of an interventions or reforms intervention. In a best case scenario, when you start planning an intervention or a reform process, you plan for implementation research in parallel from the beginning. It's a proactive learning process for understanding how and why an intervention or reform works. Implementation research produces essential knowledge in real time to answer questions about replication, equity, scale, cost effectiveness, and quality, and therefore is an important part of a practitioner's toolkit. Implementers must budget and plan for implementation research alongside implementation costs. It's intended to be pragmatic and embedded in implementation. Implementation research focuses on questions that are grounded, pragmatic, and related to the implementation of the intervention. In this regard, it is similar to action research. Implementation research cannot be conducted in isolation from the implementation of the intervention itself. It is ideally embedded from the outset, and the implementation team are critical members of the implementation research team, supplemented with research expertise as needed, and we'll come back to that. It's formative and in real time. So implementation research uses responsive and flexible research designs, and it anticipates the needs for multiple cycles of data collection and analysis. To facilitate adaptation and learning, results must be assessed and processed rapidly. Methodologies that can generate a quick turnaround are typically favored over those that require long lead times. Effective implementation research requires strong feedback loops as well, which will facilitate looking at the elements of the intervention or reform, adaptation, and learning from the beginning, as well as a robust system to document feedback as it's received. It is also participatory. As noted earlier, one of the hallmarks of implementation research is its focus on the stakeholder perspective. Participatory designs engage those stakeholders in a direct and meaningful way, not through intermediaries, or based on assumptions about what those stakeholders want or need. This often requires co-creation of the research design with stakeholders, including in the development of research questions, which allows it to be demand-driven and serves as a basis for collaborative decision-making using the findings and insights generated. It is also systems-focused. Implementation research focuses on a real-world system, namely the interactions between the intervention, the strategies used to implement it, the context, or often multiple contexts as the intervention or reform is taken to scale, and stakeholders' motivations to adopt the required knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors to achieve the desired outcomes. In a real-world setting, none of those factors can be isolated from the larger systems in which they operate. So implementation research is a critical tool to understand how different elements of the system affect each other. As with other forms of research, rigorous design and implementation of the research remains important, as do ethical considerations and safeguarding duties for minors and any vulnerable populations who might be involved in the research. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about how implementation research differs from other forms of research. We had put up 2 key points here for comparison, and I apologize for not having action research in here. Had I anticipated your questions, I would have had that as a separate column in this chart as well. But let's think a little bit about how we're going to distinguish the differences between academic research, evaluation, which many of you are probably familiar with, and implementation research. This comparison may be helpful as we begin to think about the roles and responsibilities in implementation research and how they differ from your prior experience or from other forms of research. So first, let's focus on the focus of implementation research is better aligned with evaluation and action research than academic research. The audience for implementation research is practitioners and stakeholders who will have more varied levels of knowledge and interest in the outcomes than you would find in academic research or evaluation. The audience is also a little bit different. Whereas academic research is focused typically on other scholars, evaluation is generally intended to inform a funder and practitioners. Implementation research is really intended to inform the practitioners and a wide range of stakeholders. And so, again, that question of the knowledge that they have and their level of interest and ability to absorb information is an important factor. The research questions in implementation research should be driven by the needs of the implementer first, the funder second, and with support from a research methodologist, but not driven by the researcher. So this is a key difference. Next slide, please. Looking at methods, similarly, they are selected jointly with guidance from the research methodologist, which is typically more than support. So they do, once the questions are determined, the research methodologist should have a sizable role. But at the end of the day, those methods have to be vetted and often implemented by someone who's not a trained researcher. And so then as we think through data collection, it's often conducted by the implementer or by other stakeholders, not a trained researcher or evaluator. So the approaches have to be thoroughly considered, accessible, and relatively easy to administer. It's important to note that this is key to data reliability and validity. So ongoing support or even supervision through the data collection process to ensure quality is something to build into your plan. Finally, data analysis and data interpretation, which is often lumped together for academic research and for evaluation, should be considered as distinct processes for implementation research. The data analysis may be conducted by the implementer or the researcher, but the data interpretation should be conducted with the stakeholders as well. They need to be part of the process of making sense of the data rather than be recipients of the information. This means that data analysis may be iterative as well, particularly for qualitative data. Does anyone have questions about the differences between academic research, evaluation, and implementation research, or action research as we've laid it out? So let's see, we've got a couple in there. Let's see, what do we have for?
Yeah, so Christy, we have one question
Yes.
that talks about the process of monitoring and evaluation and how that runs throughout the research steps or not? Can you talk perhaps a little bit about the role of M&E?
Absolutely. So implementation research generally is additive. So it is additional to whatever is already in place for monitoring and evaluating an effort. It should be complementary. It should take advantage of existing processes and tools so that it's not creating more burdens than is necessary. So it's a very good practice to streamline those things together as best we can when we are conducting implementation research. It will also, in a best case scenario, leverage the data that's generated through those monitoring and evaluation processes as well, where data sharing agreements can be put in place. If it's a third-party evaluation, it may or may not be simple to put data sharing agreements in place for that information, but the monitoring data should certainly be part of what is considered in the implementation research design and leveraging what can be done there. It may also be that the implementation research questions inform a broader learning agenda and then become part of that monitoring data collection. So if you design them together, they'll begin to look fairly seamless. However, it often doesn't happen that way. And so a little bit later, tomorrow, we'll actually talk about what happens when things don't line up from the beginning, because often it does not, despite our best hopes for a perfect world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is also another question related to this about the importance of data collection. You kind of have already touched on it. And I see there's a question also about rigor, etc. I think we'll get to the rigor and the bias and all of that a little bit later. But perhaps anything else you want to add about data collection?
Not specifically. I think let's table that for now, and we'll bring it back up after a few more slides when we get into some of these next points.
Yeah, and keep the questions coming. We'll get back to them. So just post them in the chat, and we'll have another Q&A a little bit later. Back to you, Christy.
All right, next slide, please. And we've covered that, so next one. Thank you. Although there are many different ways to frame implementation research questions, we thought it would be useful to highlight some of the key types of questions that you might see for each of the 3 areas of implementation research. For stakeholders, you might ask questions about normative constraints, the perceived necessity or desirability of the intervention, and the behaviors involved in implementing the intervention with fidelity. In examining the context, you might ask about difference by geography or population groups, operational barriers, or capacity barriers that the implementer has. For the intervention delivery, you might ask about what is working or not within specific contexts, what kinds of adaptations might be necessary, and what drives sustainability. Next slide, please. So how might we measure this? And this comes to your questions, some of the questions that have been in there about how do we do this? So first and foremost, the question you decide to ask will determine the kinds of changes you expect to see and how you're going to measure those changes. One of the key concerns for many policymakers is how to ensure rigor and quality in the implementation research process, particularly when you may be reliant on qualitative data. As a first step, you should ensure that someone with research methodology expertise is part of the team. The methodologist or methodologists, plural, depending on the need, can help guide the development of protocols, quality control processes, and tools that will achieve the goals of the research activity. Further, it's important to be very clear and limited on the questions asked. Implementation research is not well suited to broad questions. Rather, it's best used for targeted, narrow questions. This also reduces the time required for each phase of implementation research. Multi-part questions should be addressed sequentially through an iterative process. It's also important to engage stakeholders and to come to consensus on what change or progress looks like. What metrics are meaningful to the various stakeholders given their different Positions in the system, they may have very different expectations for what outcomes should be. Addressing these concerns at the beginning of the research and getting to consensus on them limits the possibility of political maneuvering by stakeholders later. IR, or implementation research, sorry, you will hear me call that IR at times, so meaning the same thing, is agnostic on data collection methods. IR is not based on theory or specific academic disciplines' epistemological stances. The questions drive the methods, which will then determine how the data will be captured and analyzed. It is also important to recognize that some obstacles or barriers may be hard to perceive at the ministry level, for example, but people on the ground in the system every day, teachers or schoolmasters, may see them very clearly. So while we want to ensure we have valid, reliable, accurate data, some research questions may not require extensive effort to answer. It may also be necessary to use proxy measures for real-time decision-making if, for example, the school testing calendar or the fiscal calendar do not align. This is another reason that reaching consensus on measurements of success and failure at the outset is critical. It allows us to right-size data collection to achieve validity and reliability as cost-effectively as possible. So let's pause here again for questions. And I'm looking,
Yeah.
which
So,
research design?
so perhaps one of the questions is about implementation research, since it's kind of done in real time. I think the question says, how can we utilize it when there's really very tight time constraints? So sometimes we might only have 2 weeks to give a recommendation for a regulation for some implementation improvement. Is IR a good approach for that?
In that case, I would say probably not. I would actually do a very quick action research approach on that because implementation research is largely dependent on getting that stakeholder consensus, and that takes time. So if you have a very constrained timeline, like 2 weeks, I would suggest that's probably not your best tool. It might be something you want to advocate for and build in later. Now, if it's something you have built in already, certainly it should be able to provide you with information coming out of the process. But if it's not something you already have in place, then it's probably not something you can get in place and get results in 2 weeks.
I'll pick one other question, and if we don't get to your question throughout the training, please know that we will also share responses to your questions in writing after the webinar. So don't worry, we will cover all of them, but perhaps not all of them during the webinar. So one of the other questions is, how do we ensure that implementation research remains truly participatory throughout the entire cycle, especially in systems where power is centralized or where stakeholders like teachers or parents are rarely consulted? I know we have a kind of centralization kind of question later, but do you want to touch on it briefly, Kirsty?
Sure, I can. That is a challenge, managing power dynamics and creating a I wouldn't say a non-hierarchical, but perhaps a less hierarchical space, a more small d democratic space in which to engage stakeholders where everyone's perspectives matter, not just those who would be considered experts for one reason or another, um, is very difficult, and it's not something to be underestimated. We do not in this training spend an extensive amount of time. We do talk about roles and we do talk about priorities. So there are some opportunities in this training to talk about that. However, there are tools in the guidance note around stakeholder analysis and stakeholder engagement that might be sort of a better resource than some of the material that will be in the PowerPoint specifically.
And one other quick question, and then we'll move on to the next slide so we don't fall too far behind. So the question is, we use implementation research and implementation science concurrently. Is there a distinction?
In that research is asking questions, and hopefully then informs the practice. Implementation science is looking at sort of an approach and an effectiveness approach. And it is a systems approach. Implementation research basically would be the research process you use to inform implementation science.
All right. We'll go on to the next slide, Christy.
Okay. So some of you were asking some questions, and I know we haven't gotten to all of them, but hopefully this will answer some of those questions about why you might want to use implementation research. When would this be an appropriate tool to pull out of your toolkit? So the first and perhaps most important benefit of implementation research is risk mitigation. Every time a ministry invests in a new reform or funds an expansion of a pilot, there's risk involved. The reform may be controversial for key stakeholders. The reform may have unintended negative consequences for some participants. Sometimes there are political directives that have to be implemented without really knowing how well they may work, either at a pilot stage or at scale. If a reform was not as effective as hoped, we may start looking for explanations or excuses rather than asking ourselves, what could or should we have done differently? Implementation research helps us avoid this situation in the first place by providing us with real-time information and data to support critical decisions throughout implementation. It helps us mitigate financial and reputational risk, as well as the risk of losing an important opportunity for reform. The next benefit is the ability to understand barriers to sustainability and develop a plan to deal with those barriers. An in-depth understanding of barriers to sustainability is the first step towards developing the plan and for removing them. Implementation research provides opportunities to identify those barriers and engage stakeholders at multiple levels in the resolution. Finally, implementation research often aligns with goals commonly found in national education plans. It generates data for organizational learning at multiple levels. It provides direction for adaptation to ensure effectiveness of education programs, and it creates opportunities for increased stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please. And we wanted to just share a quick example of why this might be a necessary tool. And we're going to pick on an agency that is soon to be no more. As we know, it is sometimes difficult to make the case that research into an evidence-based practice is necessary or useful. But even when you have an evidence-based practice, many of you know that the results can vary significantly for a number of reasons, some of which may be within your control and some of which may not. So this chart was excerpted from a recent USAID 10-year retrospective on its structured pedagogy programming for literacy. Even the positive results point to variation in its outcomes. As the chart shows, these interventions worked for some students, up to 59% in Ghana with the best case scenario, but it worked for fewer than half of students in other countries and resulted in no significant changes in student reading in 2 of the countries. And although USAID and lots of educational professionals globally have generated evidence to show that the theory behind structured pedagogy is sound, the report was unable to identify why these approaches worked for some and why not for others. Or in the cases of no significant difference at all, why not, despite the investment of millions of dollars? To be ethical education professionals working in an effective system, we need to understand those whys and to manage our resources as effectively as possible to give every learner their chance to achieve their best. Next slide, please. It might help to think a little bit about who benefits from implementation research and how. And let's think first about who benefits directly. First and foremost, the implementer has the most to gain from implementation research, along with the funder, if those 2 entities are not the same. If it's a government implementing it, it may very well be the same. There are also significant benefits to the participants. The service deliverers will be able to use their time and resources more effectively, and hopefully more rewardingly from a professional perspective. The recipients of the services delivered will see better services and better outcomes. Local research organizations, university-based or others, have the opportunity to further develop their capacity. Underrepresented groups, or groups that don't have formal organizations representing them, will have an entry point into discussions with power structures and will gain experience navigating those. All of those have positive impacts with spillover effects for the community. It may also, in some cases, reduce the community-based resources needed for education and allow them to flow into more productive areas. Next slide, please. We should also consider the indirect benefits of implementation research. And governments, both education-related agencies and others, benefit from more efficient budget utilization. Future participants in their communities do as well from better service delivery. Opportunities for engagement, particularly if implementation research is ongoing as an activity is scaled up. And more efficient use of fees or taxes to fund education. The upshot is that this moves towards scale, which represents larger effects. Next slide, please. So we're going to take the next 15 minutes and break into groups. So we'll see how the breakout rooms work here. I believe we'll have 7 rooms, and Maria, did you want to provide the direction here on the discussion?
I'm afraid you're on mute, Maria.
Okay, so we will take about 15 minutes in smaller groups, and we invite you to think of one example in your country, in your context, of where implementation research might be useful. So you'll have some discussion, and then we also invite you either during your breakout group or after your breakout group to post your examples in an application in a Padlet, and I'll just quickly show you where it is, and my colleague will post the link to the Padlet. So can I share my screen? So when you click on the link, you will get to a page like this. And if any of you are not able to use the link, just post your responses after the breakout groups in the chat. But for those of you who can access it, it should be very simple. And the first question that we are tackling are these first 3 rows or columns. We have created one for each language. And so you can post your responses here, one priority that your government or organization has for which implementation research could be useful. So you just click on this little plus sign and type your answer, and then you just publish it. So it should be very simple. But again, if you have problems, just put it in the chat. And with that, we will go into the breakout groups.
But we've got everyone back together now. So, and we are a little more than halfway through our time. We're going to take a break here for about 5 minutes to let everyone stretch, get up from your computers, and get some more caffeine or water or whatever your choice is. But did anyone have a final reflection you wanted to share with the wider group? Thinking about national or regional or local priorities and how you might use implementation research. If you haven't gone and put it in Padlet, do take this opportunity to do that. The link is there in the chat. And hearing no volunteers, we will go ahead and take our break. All right, we are, I think, ready to begin again. Can I ask that the slides be put back up? Fantastic, thank you. And let's go ahead and move to the next slide. All right. We also thought it might be helpful to look at a specific case. Some of you are asking for examples, so we thought that this would be a helpful exercise. So we are going to look at a case study, which hopefully everyone received at the beginning of the meeting here. That is a one-page summary of an implementation research effort around teaching practices for early grade reading. And there are a couple of things that we want you to focus on as you review the case study. So we're going to ask you to take a few minutes to read it, and then in a group, you will take about 15 minutes, and we want you to identify the following. First, what are the key quality issues? Where are the areas where you think there are opportunities for things to be done better? Second, who are the primary stakeholder or beneficiary groups? And third, what is the value proposition of implementation research for one of the stakeholder groups? You can select any stakeholder group that you want to in the discussion, and think through why they would be willing to engage in implementation research, why they would want to use it. So does anyone have any questions about the case study? Does everyone have the case study? Let me start there. And thank you. Allison just posted the links in the chat there. So if you have not seen them, please do click on those links to pull the one in the language that you prefer.
And Christy, one of the suggestions I would also have is that perhaps we can just do some quick feedback still from the previous breakout group, since we didn't have enough time before the break. We'll make perhaps the case study a little bit shorter, because I think it would be great to hear back from some of the groups who are still willing and interested to provide the feedback from their examples in country. Would that be okay? Christy, is that okay? You're on mute.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yes. So if any of the other groups, I know we had some really lively discussion in group 4, and any other group who still wants to just quickly, just say a few sentences about the example that where you think it could be applied in your country. So can I just call on group 4 since that was mine?
I don't know what is the number of my group, but we do have some responses from our different members. Like Anil have, then from Kennedy, where there is a participant, from Sri Lanka, there is a participant, and they have highlighted some issues relevant to this application of this implementation research. One of our participants has raised the issue of dropouts, increasing dropout rate of the students at secondary level, where this implementation can be applied. Then another of the participants has also raised the issue of the curriculum reforms at teachers training and how we can implement these in all teachers training institute. This is the issue that they are facing right now in Sri Lanka. And in Pakistan, we are still working on teaching licensing. And as we have phased out all the teachers training programs and we are working on it, which teachers training program would be fit in for the an entire educational system. So this type of implementation research would be help us to in finding out the data about the need situation and analysis and about the need that why we need to change this entire teachers training system. And then it would be also help to the stakeholders and the government to how to change the teachers training styles, teachers training methodology for the pre-service and in-service teachers. So I think it's a great tool and we can use it in the current situation now. Thank you very much. This is
Great.
Aruj from Pakistan, and I'm assistant professor at Teachers Training Institute of Pakistan.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you
Great
so much.
examples. I see Sajid has his hand up. So if you want to speak, just raise your hand.
All right. So our group also had people from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Maldives, and Bangladesh. I think from Pakistan, just as Aruj said, the teaching license policy was considered as one policy, which is being rolled out in the province of Sindh. And this implementation research could really benefit in terms of how should we see the rolling out of the teaching license. There are two other specific examples that came from Pakistan. One was on girls' stipend, whether it has an effect on students' enrollment and retention, especially girls. The other one was on digital classes, whether they have any impact. The example from Bangladesh was about early grade reading and whether it's working in the primary section. In Afghanistan, we had interest about whether the policy is relevant to the ground realities. Again, from Bangladesh, we had policies about girls dropout that could be looked at from the implementation perspective. Sri Lanka talked about assessment. Maldives couldn't get time. So that's the overall ballpark understanding that we had from our group. Thank you.
Excellent. Great. Any other volunteers who want to speak up, just raise your hand. Not sure if I see any hand up. Anybody else? Yes, I see Rokeya Akhtar. I
Yes,
mispronounce
yes,
that, please.
yes, thank you. I just want to add with Sajid Ali that I mentioned about the inclusion in education. In Bangladesh, the children with disabilities policies and strategies to include them in the regular primary schools and secondary schools are not that much visible and not amended yet. So what is the actions needed on that? That is my interest. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, I think we'll go and move on to the case studies. And again, please insert your examples in the Padlet if you can. And with that, back to Christy for the case study.
Thank you. Okay. So we will take the next several minutes, as I said before, as I'm looking at, let me give you an exact number because we're going to adjust our number just a little bit here. So please take the next 3 minutes to read the case study, hopefully, and it won't take longer than that in the language you are most comfortable in. And then we will spend 10 minutes in the breakout rooms, and then we'll come back together and talk through it. All right. Can you send us to our breakout rooms, please? Thanks. Well, thank you all and welcome back. Does anyone want to share reflections from their groups? You heard the tail end of our discussion here in the main room. Were there any observations that you had thinking specifically around question 3 and the value proposition of implementation research for one of the stakeholder groups? If you would let us know which stakeholder group and sort of what you thought the main value proposition was.
I see Itaf has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna give you a quick recap of the conversation in the Arabic language speaking group. So I'll concentrate more in terms of the third question, but quickly, actually, in terms of the quality of the issues, we had a discussion in terms of whether the question was clear enough or not, but generally, we felt actually that the issue about equity, access, and inclusion might be some of the good qualities in relation to the issue at hand for early grade students. The second question in terms of the stakeholder, we had like a wide range of a stakeholder that could really benefit from such a very important question. Nonetheless, a policymaker at a government level, of course, parents, teachers, and researchers, and education institutes, and teachers' college. Most importantly, with regard to the issue of the third question, there are, of course, diversity of input from my colleagues, but one of the key issues we felt is about influencing policies and practices at institutional level for the Minister of Education, where some of the practices learned could be institutionalized at a large scale, and policy could be actually amended to reflect these good practices. And of course, that would integrate the scaling of the training for teachers to include these practices and to make sure that they are actually capturing the issue. Some other issues that we felt the question could help actually address and then scale would be the issue of inclusion and equity, specifically when we are speaking about children with disabilities, with learning difficulties, girls versus boys, those from urban areas versus rural areas, rich resource areas with poor resource area, many issues in terms of equity that could be beneficial. Thank you.
Great. I think in our group, we tackled particularly the stakeholders, but I see Sajid has his hand up, so let's go to Sajid.
I think our group talked about lots of other stakeholders, but particularly delved into two stakeholders. One was ministry and the other one was the funder/donor. And I think the value proposition for both of these groups, for example, the case study was very clear and keen on highlighting that it was a presidential supported education reform, and it was so high stakes, and therefore the value proposition of this research was the highest for the Ministry of Education to show that a particular reform has worked and that it is sustained and that it is going to be implemented further. And the second value proposition was for the funders because of it appeared that it was a funding program, and the funders through the research has to show that a particular implementation or particular program has implemented well, has shown the results, and has involved lots of people, so that the value proposition for them was to show that it works.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Great, good examples. I see David has his hand up.
Thank you for our group discussion in group number 5 regarding the stakeholders that we have discussed in the context discussion. For the stakeholders, we have discussed that the government ministry at the ministerial level, it's more like a policy or the policy level where they do the architecture of the policy and plans and the policy level, and then the provincial government and district are the implementers with the teachers. So that is to improve the teaching curriculum for teachers at the local level was the level of consultation, and also the universities that were involved, teachers union were involved. All this consultation are different stakeholders that needs to be engaged, and then there was limited engagement in it. And then also when you're looking at the institution, I mean, in implementing policy for early childhood, there are also private institutions, private schools that are being operated by church or private business, where they also provide that. So different stakeholders are also included in that discussion. So when talking about the provincial government, they are more like the implementers for PNG context, Papua New Guinea context. The national government serves a different function, and then the provincial government serves the implementing function. So there are different laws that also guide. So in that context analysis or the context itself, it was limited in that space. So we had to discuss about this stakeholder. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Anybody else who wants to report back from their group or their personal observations?
I belong to group 2. So actually this intervention shows how stakeholder support can promote the interventions, because here from the government level and up to the root level, each level is well designed and they all contributed to the reading intervention, which promoted grade 1 to 3 students reading. So, and also they have thought it designed very deeply, because at each level everyone contributed, and later on they have adopted it to not to the in-service teacher trainings, but to the pre-service teachers have also been trained in this with regard to these results, and also at later on they have included it into their plans. So so the future children won't face those problems, because at the initial grades they would be learning to read. So it is very vital for their future improvements in education. So these are the thoughts from me as well as our group members. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Anybody from our group 4 who wants to say a few things?
Can I add something? Yeah.
Yes, please go.
From my point of view, that I am just this type of research suddenly brings a revision or revisit to the approaches, and then what kind of teachers development must be reviewed, what kind of training or any skill development regarding this sort of approaches needed. This might be evaluated from this research. And finally, stakeholders involvement, especially the parental involvement. What type of involvement is necessary to scaling up or for readers improvement in reading skills, in development reading skills. So these sorts of issues or challenges might be addressed as a result of the research. Thank you.
Great, you're raising a really good point, and that was actually also something that came up in my group, which is the parental involvement, especially because of the age of the children that this program is about. So parents are really important. And there was also a discussion, about, in a way, the students are obviously also a beneficiary and in a way a stakeholder. So the challenge with that age group, of course, is sometimes that it's harder to involve them directly. And so perhaps parents can be a proxy. I see another hand up, Shamsul, and I think after that, I'll hand it over back to Christy.
Yes, thank you. So I would add up to what Mr. Sajid said. So in fact, one of the the thing that can be used as a proposition of the IR to the stakeholder, that was for the provincial representatives, because they came to know about the bottlenecks, and also the based on the findings they had, that how the resources can be utilized, and what are the problems, and what can be the issues that they must have some preparations for it, and while they are continuing their program. So that was one thing that can be added to the provincial representatives that the IR findings can affect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. These are all really, really great thoughts, and you will get to practice more of it as part of your homework. But back to Christy.
Thank you. And if we can have the slides back. Perfect. So let's think a little bit as we are closing out the day here. Hopefully everyone has gained a little bit of clarity on what implementation research is and why we might want to use it. And as Maria said, there's an optional homework item for everyone to consider before tomorrow's session. So let's talk a little bit about how in your role you can advocate for implementation research. And thinking through, as a first point, what are the key principles of effective advocacy? So first, it's imperative to create a sense of urgency. We need to address these gaps now so that we can be certain we are making a difference. And that's linked to the next point. Be honest about the gaps in performance, at least internally. We know not everything can go outside the walls of your organization, but it is important to be able to be upfront and be able to identify gaps that you want to close. You may have an opportunity to be a leader within your organization on implementation research to demonstrate its utility within your own areas of work. The utilization may be different in different contexts, but all education technical areas might have opportunities to use implementation research to understand why interventions work or don't. Finally, focus on the value proposition. That's part of why we looked at that in the last exercise. What will implementation research do that no other research tool can offer in this circumstance? Next slide, please. So now let's prepare for the homework. I don't know if everyone is familiar with the term elevator pitch. If not, an elevator pitch is a quick, succinct summation of much more information, enough to change an opinion or elicit an action, but not so much that you lose someone's attention. It usually lasts about 1 minute and is about 140 to 150 words in English. So we'll use that as a guideline. Here we have a sample of an elevator pitch for conducting implementation research, looking at teaching in rural areas and among non-mother tongue language learners. So this pitch says, great teaching drives student success. Yet even after years of investing in teacher training and materials, we continue to see deeply inequitable outcomes. Students in rural communities and those learning in a second language are still being left behind. Why? The answers aren't always obvious. That's why we need implementation research, to dig deeper, engage those directly affected, and to understand what's really happening in classrooms across diverse contexts. This kind of research doesn't just identify what works, it helps tailor solutions that fit local realities. By investing in this process, we can bridge persistent gaps and ensure every student, no matter where they live or language they speak, has a real chance to thrive. This pitch identifies the specific problem, inequitable outcomes in specific areas or communities. It also explains why implementation research is the preferred approach, the direct engagement of those affected, and the identification of tailored solutions. Finally, it highlights the expected outcome that the research will foster, decreased gaps in learning and better student outcomes. So we'll use this as a template. Next slide, please. For the homework, by tomorrow's session, we encourage everyone to think about trying to develop a 1 minute elevator pitch or at least a couple of bullet points that you would use and then sort of make into a more polished statement. We don't expect anything polished by tomorrow. But we're looking for something that you would use to convince a decision maker in a funding organization. It could be a ministry, it could be a donor, it could be a civil society organization to undertake implementation research for one of their interventions or reforms. In your case, it might be useful to use the idea that we entered into Padlet in our first discussion, looking at the priorities for national, regional, and local education interventions. So as you're doing this, you're going to think through the key arguments for the value of implementation research to the ministry or funder. Organize your arguments into bullet points or a paragraph of up to 150 words, and then submit your pitch using the form, and that link has been added to the chat. Does anyone have questions about the homework? And if not, then I'll hand it back to Maria and the KIX team.
Yeah, perhaps just to add that the form is a Google form, so I think most of you are very familiar with it. If you are having problems with accessing the Google form, let us know, and we will just add perhaps a possibility on Padlet if you have a problem with any of that. Secondly, also, we will post a link or share the PowerPoint. Yes. So we will post a link in case you have any questions as you're doing your homework. We will tomorrow morning come back and pick one or two of those examples and ask you to share your pitch with the group. So we hope that you'll all find an opportunity to put it in. Pick your stakeholder. And I think we had some really good discussions today about different types of stakeholders. If you want to be, a super student and submit two, that would be okay too, for different stakeholders. So we hope you'll find that exercise interesting. Any questions? We also will come back tomorrow morning to some of the questions that you posted today and answer some of them, but please feel free. We'll add just 2 more minutes to answer any questions that you might have before we close. Just raise your hand or type it in the chat. No questions right now. So back to anything else, Christy, from your side?
Just to say thank you all for spending a couple of hours with us today, and we hope to see you again tomorrow.
And perhaps I just wanted to also add, we have the full guidance note, obviously. It was written in English. We have done kind of a very sloppy approach, I must admit, or a very quick approach just because of the time to translate it also, but it is machine translated. We will provide a more professionally developed translation after the conference, and we'll share it with all of you, of course. So with that, thank you. Is there anything, Marina, from your side for any closing?
Maria, no, just first of all, to thank you and Christine, and of course, all of the participants for such an engaging session. And I just want to reassure everyone that was writing in the chat that we'll send also the homework link to your email along with the slides of this first day, so you can also review those in preparation for tomorrow's session. And we look forward to continue this engaging discussion tomorrow with you all. With that, thanks everyone. And thanks also everyone who was staying quite late in your time zone. Thank you for all the engagement today.